got 8 o'clock, and I know Jonathan has a lot to share, so I'm going to get us started. So, Mr. Jonathan James is a grad student at Sacramento State University. He also works for HDR. He is working on his master's degree on the ethical and efficient exclusion techniques for transportation structures. Did I get that right? Yes. Okay. So today, what we're going to be talking about is the northern long-eared bat listing is changing on March 31st from endangered from threatened to endangered. And so Jonathan's going to share with us how that will affect our transportation projects. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, so as Jen mentioned, I am from California, Sacramento State. I don't know if anybody else here is from like Southwest United States, but like there's snow outside. It's very new for me.
Do you want to do a snow angel?
I really thought about going outside last night and making a snowman for the first time.
Wrong type of snow.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about changes to the listing status for the northern long-eared bat, Perimyotis septentrionalis. I'm not going to say that name too much, it's very long. But we're going to talk about reasons for the listing, why this listing is important, and what this means for agencies, federal and non-federal projects moving forward. So a little bit about me. HDR, I'm a biologist. I'm experienced in the acoustic detection, capturing, handling, and telemetric tracking of bats throughout the western United States. And I am a current graduate student at Sacramento State University, where I am studying the ethical and efficacious exclusionary methods for bats as they roost underneath transportation structures. So it's bridges, culverts, and pipes majorly. We're going to go over some species accounts. We're going to talk about white nose syndrome, majorly talk about the listing status and what that means. We're also going to talk about the tricolored bat and the little brown bat in a little bit more detail. And then we're going to talk about some other bats that you all have in North Dakota. And then lastly, how you can help. So first things here, our friend, northern long-eared bat, commonly abbreviated down to NLEB or NLEB. As a bat biologist, we also use the common 4-letter species code, so this one would be MICE. It's an average size Myotis species. They're fairly small, fit in the palm of your hand, decent wingspan. They're very wide ranging, and we'll look at a range map here in a little bit. But they hibernate in caves and mines in the winter, and alternatively they will also use trees, but it's not as common. They utilize forested areas outside of winter for roosting, foraging, and commuting between different areas. These bats are commonly known as whispering bats. Because they have such big ears, they can use quieter echolocation that prey can't pick up on, and they're also able to listen for prey generated sounds and then glean prey off of substrate. The second one I want to talk about just quickly is the tricolored bat, perimyotis subflavus, also wide-ranging, also will hibernate in caves and mines, and exhibit very high roost fidelity. So what that means is that season after season they will continue to go back to the same exact roost in order to hibernate. They have interesting roost selections. They're kind of opportunistic. They will roost kind of wherever they seem to be able to fit. So that's kind of a problem for a lot of projects moving forward. And they are currently proposed to be listed as endangered from no listing. Who here, just show of hands, knows what white nose syndrome is? Okay, who would feel comfortable explaining what white nose syndrome is? Perfect, okay, cool. So white nose syndrome is a fungal disease that affects bats. It was introduced in North America in 2006. We don't still know quite how it got here. The major theory is human-mediated, but it is a fungal disease caused by Pseudogymnoastis destructans, another long name I'm not going to repeat. We commonly just say PD. It cyclically affects hibernating bats. And I have an asterisk on hibernating bats because we know that it can affect non-hibernating bats through lab testing, but it seems that the ability to hibernate within these kind of deep cave systems that allows the fungus to continue to grow is really one of the major keys that allows white nose syndrome to continue to propagate through populations. And it cyclically infects bats. As bats return to roost every single winter, it will continue to reinfect bats. So white nose syndrome, what it does is it causes an increase in the frequency of torpor arousal. Who knows what torpor is? Okay. So torpor is sort of akin to hibernation. It's a state of sort of decreased physiological activity that's marked by decrease in body temperatures, decrease in metabolic rate. And the problem with increasing that torpor arousal through a hibernation period is that that increases that metabolic rate as they need to come out of torpor, increases metabolic rate and burns off all the energy reserves that they have in the system. And what that means is that in the dead of winter, when they need to be able to survive through the winter, they burn up all their fat. And so that means I need to go find food. There's no food in the winter. So what happens is as they're trying to find food, they usually either starve or they freeze to death. So northern long-eared bat is probably one of the worst off bats that we've had facing white nose syndrome. So pointing to this here, I want to just focus on, it's a little bit hard to see. I want to just focus on this kind of like dark brown region here. The very far left here is our northern long-eared bat, and you can see that at pre-arrival to invasion, we see a huge jump in the number of colonies that have 0 bats. And then as it becomes an epidemic and established, we see an even larger jump in the amount of colonies that have 0 bats. You can see that for some of these other bats, like the big brown bat, Tesicus fuscus, it's fared fairly well with white nose syndrome. We do see an increase, but overall, things have remained relatively stable. So how is this listing going to affect agencies and projects? This is the reason why you're all here. Here's a range map of northern long-eared bat. So everywhere where we have this kind of gray is northern long-eared bat territory. So if you find yourself working on something within that gray shaded region, this is going to affect you. Additionally, just for information here, these hashed boxes here all along the East Coast down into southern United States are areas or counties where we have evidence of white nose syndrome between 2006 and 2015, and then the black boxes are, same thing, counties where we have evidence of white nose syndrome from 2015 to 2022. So the effective date for this change is March 31st. I'm sure some of you have been keeping up with this. You noticed that the effective date was January 30th. The service decided to push that because they felt that they were not ready to support agencies and projects moving forward. So they pushed this by additional 60 days so that they could develop some kind of strategy and documentation to assist. Currently, as of today, March 8th, northern long-eared bat is still a threatened species. So if you have a project that's going forward that's going to be done by March 31st, you're good. You don't really need to do anything. You don't need to worry about this. If it's going to extend past March 31st, I recommend getting it together and getting that thing done prior to so you don't have to deal with this. But this uplisting to endangered is going to remove the 4D ruling on that effective date, and it's going to apply the full suite of prohibitions and the exceptions to those prohibitions for all endangered species as documented in Section 9 and Section 10 of the Endangered Species Act. So what does that mean, really? Well, it means that all take, incidental or purposeful, on or after March 31st is now prohibited. So federal actions, what that means is that you're going to have to go through Section 7 consultation in order to find if you have reasonable probability of take so that you can get exempt from Section 9 by filling out an incidental take statement. Non-federal projects, you're going to be adhering to Section 10A1B of the ESA to pursue incidental take permits upon assessment. And assessment is going to be present or probable absence surveys to do things like acoustic monitoring, netting if it's necessary, emergence counts, things like that. Importantly, I'm going to read this kind of word for word here. If northern long-eared bats are present in a given area at any time of the year, it is possible that, in some cases, take may occur regardless of when the impact occurs. So we don't have a whole lot of documentation about it, but there is evidence to suggest that northern long-eared bat has relatively high roost fidelity. And so what that means is, if you are affecting an area where northern long-eared bats are known to be, even if you're outside of breeding season, outside of hibernation season, you may get take because those bats are going to come back to that same exact area and not have habitat that they once had. So it's very important to understand kind of where you're at and what it is that you are doing. So what can you expect in the form of support? So Fish and Wildlife Service has 4 kind of documentations available for both federal and non-federal projects. This first one is for federal projects only. Section 7 consultation. And this documentation is to improve the efficiency and consistency of Section 7 consultation towards a Section 9 exemption. What they're kind of looking to do is that if you, as a federal entity, are pursuing projects that are kind of like just kind of regular things that, or regular or routine projects, right? This going through the Section 7 is going to get faster and faster for you. It's going to be easier for you to fill out. The second thing that they have is the range-wide determination key. And this is available through the Information for Planning and Consultation website through the service. And this allows project proponents, project managers to receive automatic verification or concurrence for some of the actions that you guys may be doing. And this, again, like the Section 7 consultation, will streamline the review of kind of producing the predictable projects that we know are not going to be affecting or along your habitat. Thirdly, we have the habitat modification guidance document, and this is to assist your private, state, local, and tribal entities and those project managers so that they can determine if you're reasonably certain to take northern longyear during your habitat modifications. Your managers may decide that you want to develop a habitat conservation plan, HCP, for activities and apply for an incidental take permit under Section 10 of the ESA. Important to note, the service documents that this is voluntary. You don't necessarily have to do this, but it is important to understand that if you do not go through this process and you do have take, the weight of the world is going to fall down on you from the ESA. Lastly, they have the wind guidance document, and this simply provides a strategy that's going to allow companies to continue to operate and monitor for northern longyear bat in a manner where take is not reasonably certain to occur. So if you're looking to develop new wind guidance or new wind facilities on areas where northern longyear bat is reasonably certain to occur, you're going to run into a lot of blockades. But if you are already operating or already on an area where northern longyear bat is not reasonably certain, you shouldn't run into many issues. So all these documentations are actually live and available as of March 6th, 2 days ago. So thankfully that was good for this presentation, obviously. They are interim right now and they're awaiting final comment. And so we should see a final comment in the next, I believe it's by April of next year. So April 2024, everything will be finalized. But these interim documentations are good to use and the service has allowed them to be used. And so we talk a lot about doing these kind of absence or probable absence surveys, and what does that look like? Well, the current accepted protocol for determining presence of northern longyear bat is the range-wide Indiana bat and northern longyear bat survey guidelines published by the service March 29th of 2022. In talking with the authors, no major changes are going to be occurring. We may actually see some scaling back of some of the requirements. I know anecdotally, working with Florida bonneted bats, we've actually seen from the consultation guidelines a lessened sort of need for acoustic monitoring nights. It went from 14 down to 10, and that's because we don't really want to mess with the bats. We don't want to impede them as much as more than we necessarily need to. But even though we have no major changes coming, we can expect an update around the time of the effective date. So we're expecting sometime this or next month to see an update to the guidelines. Okay, Tricolored Bat. It's proposed for listing September 13th of last year. We're fully expecting this bat to also be endangered. So I think just going forward, it's best to keep this in mind. Tricolored Bat is going to be endangered and just act in due diligence. Thankfully, North Dakota, we don't really see that Tricolored Bat is going to be in your area. It might be hitting Fargo, but generally, Tricolored Bat's not going to be found in this area. In Canada, it is emergency listed as endangered on Schedule 1 under the Species at Risk Act and was listed in 2014. The northern longyear bat is also currently endangered in Canada as of the same date. Little brown bat. There is no current status for the little brown bat, but it is currently under review by the service, also endangered in Canada. This one's going to be an issue if we get the endangered status because little brown bats are found pretty much everywhere, as you can see from the range map. I know it's probably a little hard to see from the back, but it basically covers the entire United States besides the bulk of Texas. So be ready for this one as well. I expect that with Canada having an endangered status, I expect the U.S. to follow suit. Other bats. Y'all have 10 bats in North Dakota. 10 really cool bats. So from the top left here, kind of put them clockwise, I hope everyone can see that okay. You have the Townsend's big-eared bat, aptly named. You have the silver-haired bat. Right here you have the big brown bat. You have the hoary bat, H-O-A-R-Y, for those of you who heard differently. You have the eastern red bat. And then again, you have 5 other bats that look all pretty much exactly the same. You have the tricolored bat. This is the western long-eared bat, which we'll talk about in a second. Little brown bat. You have the northern long-eared bat, and then you have the western small-footed bat. So North Dakota is interesting because if you had this in the hands of North Dakota, you might think that you are holding a northern long-eared bat. You would be incorrect. This is a western long-eared bat. They look identical. This one was captured. This is a picture I took. This is my hand in the picture. I caught this in Sequoia 2 years ago now. But the ranges for the northern long-eared bat and the western long-eared bat touch in North Dakota. So in the hands, they're almost impossible to differentiate unless you have extensive experience handling northern long-eared bats, which I personally do not. But it's just something to be mindful of. And then when we're talking about sort of trying to differentiate species and trying to do these surveys, the major thing that we do as bat biologists is acoustic monitoring and acoustic surveys. And so here we have, so the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the same species with 2 different views. This is in sauna bat, if any of you are familiar with it. So one of these is the western long-eared bat, and the other one is the northern long-eared bat. Can everyone see that? Okay. Cool. Okay. So save for some like noise on the left-hand side there on the bottom. The call structures are pretty much identical. The saving grace is the fact that one of them calls at a slightly higher frequency than the other. That seems to be pretty consistent, and it seems to be something we can rely on. But other than that, unless you really, really know what you're doing, these are impossible to differentiate. And importantly, something to note is that it's very important to understand where you are when you do these surveys. It's important to understand differences in the species that can be confused with one another. And importantly, it's good to know who to contact for a second opinion if you're in the event that you have something like this. Lastly, auto classification within these software like SonarBat or Kaleidoscope Pro is not perfect. SonarBat is claiming that both of these are western long-eared bats. I know, because these are both caught by Dr. Shuchek, the person who developed SonarBat, that one of them is a western long-eared bat and the other one is a northern long-eared bat. This one here on the right is our northern long-eared bat. It's claiming that we have the characteristic frequency down here when it should be up here, and that would be enough to tell it that it's not it. But that's why it's so important to have somebody who understands what these things mean and like what kind of characteristic markers to look for. And so then lastly, how can you help? So I've been talking with a lot of service people who find themselves within the range of the long-eared bat, and the biggest thing is due diligence. Doing the surveys properly, subbing out to the people who can do these surveys and can do them adequately and can do them in an efficient manner. That's really going to be the biggest thing. If you're able to use NABAT and populating information so that the rest of us can see it and the rest of us can kind of move forward and understand new areas that northern long-eared bat are that we did not know they were previously, it's going to be exceedingly helpful. And I think with that, that's all I got. Any questions? Yeah.
Sorry, I was a little bit late.
No, you're fine.
Did you say, by chance, say how many species of bats that we have in the United States and how many species do we have in North Dakota?
So by looking at range maps, it looks like you'll have 10 species in North Dakota. We have somewhere around 40 species in the entire United States. A lot of those kind of reach into Canada and Mexico as well.
So when someone goes out to look for this stuff, the way it sounds like it's pretty tough to tell the difference. So you're gonna have to have a pretty professional person figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Either that, or you're gonna just fall back on like it looks exactly identical. Someone just might have to fall back and say, "Well, can you be there?" But that would be bad, wouldn't it?
Well, that's why you want to sub out to people who know what they're doing. People like myself or other contractors in your area. We know what we're doing when we look at these kind of things. And thankfully, a lot of these things can be differentiated within the auto classification software and then just manually vetted on top of that.
So you go out into the field and look for the type of areas that they might perch in or hang from or nest in, and then you would probably set up acoustic things and try to pick up their stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a fairly kind of straightforward process. Habitat assessments.
So how far ahead of a project do you think you need to do this?
We
Would you
enough
need to
time-
lay it out?
Yeah.
To
you
get someone
definitely-
hired, and then how long does it take to do a survey?
Yeah, you definitely need to plan this out for like probably a season in advance at least. It can take a very long time to go through a lot of the data that's picked up by acoustic monitoring. I have a friend right now doing, also at Sac State, doing the same kind of stuff that I do, where they are looking at how the bats were affected by the Dixie fire that happened in the Tahoe region. And they have 1.5 million calls to sift through, and they have to manually vet every single one. It takes an extensive period of time. So understanding that timeline and kind of going forward prior to the project starts is really important.
They just updated our table in January. And now they have, the northern long-eared bat is no evidence of presence in North Dakota right now. Would that change if it changes from endangered to, or from what it was to endangered?
Well, if we're seeing that there's no probable presence, that shouldn't change by the listing status.
Yeah, that's what it changed that. No problem.
Okay. So if you have no probable presence, that's a good thing for projects moving forward. But you understand that bats are strange. They're found pretty much everywhere, and they are flying mammals, which is very odd. So just kind of, it's best to have due diligence because you find yourself within the range map, within the known range, even though there's no probable presence at the moment. It's best to just go forward with due diligence. Yeah.
What's the availability of people that can do the work of locating these bats, or, and when I say availability, in the area, you know, in North Dakota and northwestern Minnesota?
So I'm new to North Dakota. I don't know a whole lot of people here. But I do know that in the Midwest we have a very good base of bat biologists who are permitted to work on northern long-eared bats. And so just honestly doing a very quick Google search, you're going to find people who are available to do this work for you. Yeah.
I would like to just add on to his question
Yeah.
that the northern long-eared bat is actually in North Dakota. I netted in North Dakota for the last 6 years.
Perfect.
So it has been found here. It's more of a rare species, but it is here.
Well, they changed it, so I don't know.
Yeah, and
Because I did one earlier this winter, and then I went to do another one, and then
yeah. And then also with the guidance that you brought up from Fish and Wildlife, they have specific survey timelines that you can hit only. So they're saying if you're going to survey, you got to do it between this window, and then following that, you're going to have to run all of your sequencing. So it's going to have to be an upfront planning for this.
So they'll have to reevaluate that presence thing every season. They must have done something to change it from the previous season, so I'm assuming, yeah.
So the
there anyone in-
the habitat map has been updated by Fish and Wildlife Service, but the actual ESA table doesn't have it as listed as no evidence. That's the black-throated parrot and the gray wolf that have been updated.
Oh, is that what they changed?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got it mixed up. There's a list of like that big. One of them changed it, I thought it was the bat, but it's not the bat.
No, not the bat, yeah.
Thank you for clarifying
Yeah,
that.
no problem.
I'm sorry for my misinformation.
Got a bit excited.
I did.
Yeah, you
Look,
did.
I learned.
Way to go, Bernie. Way to go.
Hey, if the dummies don't ask a question, the dummies won't know anymore. They won't learn anything, so. And I don't do designs very often, I'm a construction person, so we do these small little chip seal jobs and things like that, which usually we do a CED, which is a short version.
I'm glad you're aware of the ESA table though, so it's good to hear.
We do have to do ESA.
Why do you think I keep asking about if you're removing any trees, Bernie?
I know that, that's what it's about.
Maybe that's a good thing too, like what are typical actions that our projects do that could affect that, right?
It does a good job of explaining that.
We talked about that this morning, right? Tree removal, any type of bridge work. those are the things we really need to pay attention to.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if any of you caught Julie's presentation yesterday talking about sustainability. She mentioned somewhere in the realm of 50 to 60% of North Dakota bridges are not up to code currently. Bats roosted underneath bridges. It's going to be a problem. If you find over longer bats underneath the bridge, you're going to have to go through this process. You are going to find bats that are listed underneath their bridges. It's going to happen. So due diligence is very important moving forward.
So you couldn't even probably pre-net your bridge underbellies prior to the project to keep them away from it. Because
You can
that
do
probably is
exclusions.
affecting stuff.
Yeah, so my thesis is an exclusion, right, is removing bats from bridges before, prior to people like yourself need to go in and do any kind of condemning destruction or reparations to the bridges. And so yeah, one of the first things that we do is just go under and look for presence, right? We're looking for guano, we're looking for whitewash. Sometimes if we're lucky, we can kind of peek in and actually see the bats in the bridge. That's the best case scenario because we can just say, hey, yeah, there are bats here. But in my experience, it's best to just go forward and understand that there's probably bats in the bridge. It's a thing. They're there, for sure.
Quick question, how many
Yeah.
species are in California that are in your study area?
So in the study area, we're trying to just focus on the Mexican free-tailed bat because it is populous and it has no listing and it's abundant. We don't want to affect any kind of species that is a state special species of concern. But in the area that I'm working like in the Fresno, like Central Valley area, we typically see 5 to 6 species on a regular basis.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you say that the northern longer bat is more susceptible to white syndrome than other species?
Not necessarily that it's more susceptible, but documentation has given us that it is one of the most impacted species by
Do you know why
rhinos.
that is?
We don't, really. Unfortunately. I wish we did.
Is there any treatment for white nose syndrome?
No. Some of the, we are kind of looking at the use of volatile organic compounds, and some researchers are looking at fumigating hybridacula, which I personally have a problem with. I don't think it's the right way to go because you're going to be affecting a lot of other things in the ecosystem. But we know through lab testing that the use of volatile organic compounds is helpful. At least it's fungistatic, meaning that it won't allow the fungus to grow any more than it is, but we're not finding anything that actually kills the fungus.
And is it, what impact is it having on populations in general?
The northern longer rat has seen a decline of 90%. So it's pretty bad. Northern longer rat has the most extirpations. So extirpation meaning local extinction, right? Just kind of like removing the colony from where it was once found. Northern longer rat has the most extirpations of any other species due to white nose syndrome alone. Yeah.
So once they're found within a project area, what sorts of exclusion practices do you recommend?
Well, exclusion practices are going to be found majorly on like structures, right? If you are on a project and you're trying to do habitat modification and tree removal, you're looking at a whole different suite of tasks that you need to have on top of that. But as far as exclusions for structures underneath bridges and stuff, one of the things that we do is we kind of put up a sort of like one-way chute that allows the bats to leave and then not be able to come back in. And then we'll seal those egress and ingress points as necessary once we have confirmed that there are no bats present in the structure anymore. Yeah.
Has there ever been a mission or goal or a study, whatever, to establish new habitat for the bats? Or should we build bat houses, hanging up in our trees and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, bat houses work. They can. Often we find that they just won't use them either. They'll opt to find new habitat instead. I don't think that humans can perfect what a kind of large swath of trees can provide for a bat colony. But we can definitely try as much as we can.
So you don't do anything like on structures? I know game and fish or wildlife put up nests or bird houses or, you know, those birds things will pre-establish or even safe nesting. We don't do anything with bats.
Yeah, I mean, we do try. Part of my study too, we put up bat boxes to just try. that they're largely ineffective, they don't use them. And we knew that going into it, but we have to do it as part of the site.
Bat box.
Yeah, we do know that Florida bonneted bats will use bat boxes quite regularly. They seem to like them. It's one of the only species we have like solid documentation that they will use them. But it's largely because they're non-hibernating and non-migratory. They kind of stay in the same place season after season after season.
So they don't hibernate.
Yeah.
You mentioned being permitted. Can you explain how you got that and like the prerequisites of getting that?
So I'm not permitted to work on northern long-eared bats. I have the majority of the qualifications to do so. The thing that I'm lacking is actually working with the species. I have no experience handling bats underneath an individual who's permitted. I know you've done netting. Are you permitted?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, I'm permitted.
Yeah.
Basically, it comes down to experience, so you have to go with already permitted individuals for a certain period of time, and then when you apply for that federal permit, you have to have references, but you also have to have tracked your hours spent handling each of those individual species for them to approve it.
Yeah. It's a long process.
So like for the gentleman that asked the question about who you would find in the upper Midwest around this area to go with, it sounds like she kind of knows her stuff. Whoever she's with.
That's endangered, like, listing work, like, you said that, like, Canada is already listed endangered, is that because their numbers are so low up there, they have different thresholds, like, I guess I naively assumed that if it was endangered, it was endangered.
Yeah, you would think, right? But Canada has a more strict policy when it regarding endangered species. There's species at risk and wildlife at risk act. So we're seeing that the northern long-eared bat of Canada has been endangered since 2014, along with the tricolored bat and the little brown bat, who do not have endangered status. We don't have any ESA status in the U.S., which seems sort of funny, right? I mean, we border Canada, it's right there. The populations go back and forth between the U.S. and Canada all the time. You would think that if it's endangered in one area, that it's endangered in the next, but it's not the case. Cool. Any other questions?
Well, I'd like to thank Jonathan for coming and talking to us about bats.